So how much time do I really spend in my 2,000 square foot garden? Let's talk about that. So before I get into how much work I actually put into the garden, I first wanted to talk about kind of what I classify to be work in the garden. So my definition of work in the garden is any input that you put in minus planting. So whether that's weeding, watering, fertilizing, filling the beds, whatever other input is going into the garden. It could be building the raised beds. It could be laying mulch. That's an input that takes time. That's work. Do I consider planting vegetables or seedlings or seeds into your garden? No, that's not work in my opinion, because you can't have a garden without doing that anyways. I mean, you can stare at beds full of dirt all you want, and I guess you could grow weeds if that was really how you wanted to garden, but you really need to plant something. So would I consider that to be work? No. By the way, there are, I don't know if you can see it, there are huge bumblebees flying right in front of the camera like every 3 seconds. It's very, very distracting, but also very cool. They're in love with all the flowers in the orchard right now, so don't mind them. They're just these big flying elephants. They're huge. Do I consider planting things? No. Do I consider harvesting things to be work? No. You might consider that to be work, but I don't. And that's because you're actually reaping something. You have to go out and harvest, yes, but isn't that the point of having a garden? Would I consider that to be work? No, that's enjoyment. That's actually enjoyment because I'm actually getting a return on my time and the work that I put into the garden. So is that work? No. But you can classify work as whatever you want. So now knowing what I classify to be work and just kind of part of having a garden and not really work at all, and now I want to talk about kind of breaking that down. So when I look at different times of the year have more work than others, obviously. Springtime and fall being periods where I have the most workload. And then obviously during the main growing season and the off season, I have my least workload. So obviously during winter when nothing's growing, that's when I have no workload at all. But when I'm in the middle of the growing season and my garden has already been established, I actually have my least amount of workload as well. And that's because I've already put all my systems in place. I've already kind of put the work and the effort into the garden, and now I can just kind of get to sit back and enjoy it. So that's really nice, especially because the spring and the fall are the best times to work in the garden. The best time to relax and enjoy the garden is the summer when it's the hottest and the most humid, but everything else loves it. So that's a really nice benefit, kind of when the work occurs. Now, how does the work get broken down? So when I'm looking at initial garden prep, this is something that really a lot of people get hung up on. They say, well, yeah, you only say that you work 20 minutes a week in the garden. That can't really be true because, when you first put the garden in, you had to have worked 30, 40 hours in that week or, in that period of time to get your garden started. That's a lot of work up front. And absolutely, our garden has been here for going on, 5 years now? So the first year that we did this, we put in each raised bed, took about 30 minutes to build. Then to fill it took maybe about another 15, 20 minutes. So give or take, let's just assume round up about an hour per bed. And that's being generous, but I'm willing to be generous. And we have 12 raised beds. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We have 14 raised beds. It's been a while since I put them in. So we have 14 raised beds. And so that's about 14 hours of work right there just to build and fill the raised beds. We have mulch in all of our garden here. So to put the mulch in place, that was work as well. We brought in, the first year that we did this, we brought in about 10 yards of mulch. And that took us a combined about 3 to 4 hours, both Mrs. MIgardener and I, taking trips with the wheelbarrow to spread out the mulch. So that was some time as well. And so a lot of people say, the first year is a ton of work. Absolutely. But if you're doing things right, you really shouldn't have to put that work in ever again, or very, very little of that work ever again, because once your beds are in place and they're full, the bulk of that work is already done. Now, the next type of work is what I consider to be seasonal work. So this is every year I have work that goes on in the garden, and that can be broken down into spring, summer, and fall. So let's talk about that. How much work do I put in the spring? So in the spring, it consists of filling the raised beds up with fresh soil. It consists of doing what I'm doing, which is weeding volunteers and other weeds and stuff that pop up. It consists of laying fresh mulch in the walkways if that's needed. And it consists of re-amending and fertilizing, giving the soil the nutrition that it needs so that it can grow for me. Because it takes work, it takes energy, but it also takes nutrients. The plants need those nutrients. So I want to make sure that the soil is as fertile as possible. And so the combined time that it takes me to do that, I would say, just again, kind of being conservative, filling the raised beds up might take me about 10 minutes per bed. So out of 14 beds, and some beds need more than others, but I'll just, round it out. That's going to be, that'll be about 140 minutes. So about 2 hours worth of time to fill up all the raised beds with soil. Then to come through here and weed, weeding is pretty, I'd say it's fairly time consuming, but when you're talking to a camera and doing it at the same time, it obviously takes way longer. But I can come through here and I don't weed all at once. I might do things in blocks. I'll do like 2 or 3 beds at a time. And if I'm weeding these systematically, I'm really just getting every single weed, and I'm really making sure that the garden is as weed-free as possible, because that means if I'm getting them young, yes, it takes longer to weed when the plants are young, but also you're not letting the plants grow up and compete against your vegetables. You're not letting them get established, get a root system established. And so when I'm weeding, it might take me, 15, 20 minutes per bed to weed, but that's really systematically picking out each and every individual little weed. So between 10 to 15 minutes, I would say, per bed to really weed it out. And once I weed, the thing is, once I weed, I do things that reduce my weeding later on. A lot of people have to put in the weeding effort all the time. They put in that work to weed all the time because they don't have the right systems in place. If your plants are spaced too far apart, there's lots of room for soil, or there's lots of open room. There's lots of open soil that gives room for weeds. My goodness. I get excited, I get ahead of myself. So when you have all that open soil, there's room for weeds to come in. So by planting your plants closely together in what we call a high intensity gardening approach, you're not only going to reduce how much weed pressure you have, but as those plants grow up, they're going to cover and mulch the soil, which will not only reduce the amount of open soil and weed pressure, but it will also affect watering. You have to water a lot less as well, which is kind of the next part. So once you have those systems in place, we come to watering. And watering, how much time do we spend watering? Well, we might only spend, because of the systems we put in place, we might only spend, 2 to 3 minutes a week on average watering. And that's because there's only a certain amount of plants in the garden that need to be watered. The rest of them are usually pretty fine even during periods of dry weather. And that's because we actually put into our beds a core. Now the core is what we call core gardening, and that's where we take a straw bale, we bury the straw bale into the garden, and we actually bury that up. We bury it over with soil, and then we plant right on top of it. And what that does is it allows the plant roots to tap into that straw as it's rotting down, and it holds on to moisture, water, acts as a water reservoir, and those plants can tap into that throughout the growing season. So do we water? Hardly ever. We hardly have to water. People always ask me, Luke, how many times do you water during the course of a season? I say, 2 or 3 times a year. All right, so the next season of gardening is the summer season. And when the summer season comes, after spring, the spring is the heaviest workload period. So the summertime brings about very little work. I'll typically work in the summer maybe 10 to 20 minutes at most in the garden. And that's broken down doing pretty much one of 2 things. Either it is watering, which I rarely do, or what it is plant maintenance. And that has to do with just pruning up plants or trellising plants. So I might be pruning up some tomatoes, I might be pruning up some squash or whatever to get them, just get more airflow so they're less prone to disease, things like powdery mildews and blights. So I might do that, and that's obviously work, but very little. And then the most amount of work is just tying up tomatoes. If you've ever grown tomatoes and tied them up, you know that they can be a lot of work. And by a lot of work, I mean maybe 10 to 15 minutes of work, but it's still work nonetheless, especially when it's hot and humid. About 10-15 minutes is all about the time that it takes for me to start dripping in sweat in the summer. So yeah, I mean, it's work and it definitely counts, but it's not that much work. And so that's just because we single stem our tomatoes. That means we prune off all the suckers, we grow them up a single stake, we grow them on an 8-foot tall furring strip. And so you know, to do that takes work. It takes time to prune off all those suckers. It takes time to tie them up to the stake. But other than that, we really don't do a whole lot of work. We really don't. All the systems are already in place, and so it's basic plant maintenance. Very, very little work. And then the last thing is the fall season. The fall season brings about kind of some similar work as spring, but not quite as much. So in the fall, I might top off my beds with a little bit more soil, not as much as I do in the spring. So that's not too much work. And then I'll re-amend. I will re-amend the soil, make sure that there's nice amount of nutrients for the springtime, make sure that I'm taking care of the soil as a good steward of the land should. And then I'm also making sure that any plants that are dead or ready to get pulled out, I'll pull them out. So I'm pulling out plants, those go into the compost pile. I'm fertilizing and re-amending, and I'm topping off the beds. And that's really all the work that I do. I don't need to do anything else because I'm pretty much just putting the garden to bed for the winter, and then springtime comes. And what's really nice is when you put a good amount of work in the fall, it actually translates to less work in the spring. So you're kind of doing yourself a favor by not just doing nothing, just pulling out plants and letting it go, because then you have to do twice the amount of work in the springtime. So by kind of evening it all out and spreading it out, I'm actually only doing, if I average it out between spring, summer, and fall, I probably would say I put in at most 30 minutes a week into the garden. And that seems absolutely crazy, and a lot of people don't believe me, but if you doubt me, go check out my book, The Autopilot Garden. I wrote it about 2 years ago now, and it really just shows you how to garden smarter and help your garden work for you so you're not always working in it. And it really just helps to get those systems in place so that, yes, there's work in the beginning, as I allude to in the book and as I've alluded to in this video. There's work, but there's not as much work as there could be, and it can really help save you time and effort as well as money, and it just helps you to grow a better garden. A lot of people ask me, is your time that you put in worth it? Are you actually getting a return that's, you know, less than if you were getting paid to do what you're doing? Is it less than what you're getting? You know, would you just rather, you know, would you be better off just going to the farmer's market and buying the produce rather than growing it? And the answer is, I would be crazy not to do what I do, because in a given year, we'll grow between $4,000 and $5,000 worth of vegetables, fruits and vegetables. $4,000 and $5,000. I mean, I certainly, even at like a minimum wage job, I get minimum wages different between every state, but going off like Michigan minimum wage, I mean, my goodness, I certainly don't put in what would be, I don't know, 400 hours. I certainly do not put in 400 hours worth of work. So, hey, I mean, take it for what it's worth. And the thing is too, it's enjoyment for me. I don't look at this like it's my job. I mean, yes, I do these videos and I love doing them and I enjoy doing them, but is it work doing this? No, it's not. It's enjoyment. I love having my hands in the dirt. And for me, you know, that also offsets that kind of the feeling of work. You know, for me, loading up the beds with soil, yeah, it takes time, and yeah, my back might be a little bit stiff the next morning, but what's life without a little bit of work? So sometimes you'd have to put a little bit of work into things that you enjoy, and if you really enjoy doing them, it doesn't feel like as much work as it really is. So I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. I know a lot of people ask this question, so I just thought it'd be kind of a fun video to do. And yeah, so I've been plenty distracted. I got to get back here to work on pulling out all these volunteer sunflowers, but I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope you learned something new. If you did, make sure to throw a like up there. Make sure to subscribe if you have not yet already. I'd really appreciate it. And as always, this is Luke from the MIgardener channel, reminding you to grow big or go home. And we'll catch you all later. See ya. Bye.